This week, I plan to write about what scripts look like in the comic industry, and what standards can be observed from scripts where the writer and the artist are two separate entities. Then the brain gremlins went, hey, yeah, start that, and then we're taking over for the rest of the week. No, you don't have a choice in the matter. So I didn't finish the study piece I wanted to do on writing scripts for comics, but I did fill over 20 pages of Google documents with a bunch of new content for the Chosen One's mentor. And I did some character designing, so I think I'm still winning this week? My productivity just decided to head in a different direction than I originally intended. I am very excited to get to share some of what I wrote, and it's coming. A chunk of this week's page count went to writing the first few chapters of the remake, and I think I've got something workable. In fact, I wanted to take what I'd learned about script writing and apply it using the content I wrote, but alas, I need to postpone that exercise till later. However, my writing did necessitate some character designing, and that I feel I can at least dabble in as a topic, since I couldn't be ready with my initial topic in time. If nothing else, it's a sneak peek at what's to come from this new version of the Chosen One's mentor that I believe will be a great addition to the original story. So I'm gonna rant a little bit about how I go about designing a character. This, I can say with confidence, is something that has no standard in the art world, so talking about it purely from my perspective is valid, and no one can judge me for it. Maybe you'll learn something, maybe you'll just nod your head and go, neat, by the end. We're ad-libbing this week. Enjoy the ride. But first, a quick rant about world building. In my original conception of TCOM, I imagined the world as being sort of sparse in the magic department. Sorcerers were the only magical beings in the world that they knew of, and they were rare. I wanted the fact that magic was so rare to be a burden on my main character, Renan, because finding a fellow sorcerer to talk to was hard, and finding one capable of teaching you that wasn't related to you was even harder. That feeling of isolation as a sorcerer without a magic community was going to be a part of Renan's character, and would in turn color the relationship he has to Eva, the only other competent sorcerer within arm's reach, and any other sorcerers he encounters. The only problem is, when you write a world that treats your magic system as a rarity, that doesn't give you a whole lot of room to work as far as introducing other magically inclined characters goes. You either have to play up that isolation factor, or risk setting up the potential writing plot hole of, wow, considering how rare magic is, somehow the main character manages to encounter a lot of other magic users in the wild. Like I mentioned, I had planned to go in the isolation direction, with other sorcerers being few and far between. But I realized as I was rethinking my plot that I wanted a more diverse magic system. I wanted to write within a world where magic was more prevalent in everyday life, and therefore the types of people Renan may encounter could be more diverse as a result. When I opened my mind up to the possibility of other schools of magic, they practically slotted themselves in on their own, and they instantly enriched my world building. On top of sorcerers, I added 3 other distinct classes of magic users. I used resources like Dungeons & Dragons to help with the names and basic structures, and then I tweaked the rule set to fit within my world building. That's when wizards entered the picture, but not your standard wizards. The wizards in the world of TCOM have some constraints to work within that make them distinct from sorcerers in the other 2 classes. The what and why is unimportant right now. What is important is that now that these options exist, it's not a wild idea to think that Renan may call on someone he knows to help with the dangerous magic baby situation. This leads to him calling in a character I'll simply dub the Wizard for now, since I'm still finalizing whether or not I'm happy with his name. As I was conceptualizing the new beginning of the story and doing some doodling, he initially popped into existence as a funny idea. What if sorcerers and wizards have a long-standing rivalry? What if Renan calls on a powerful wizard he knows for help, but he's also annoyed to have to do it? What if the wizard, who is much older than Renan, is more than happy to dunk on a young, high and mighty sorcerer for needing the help of a lowly wizard? What if Renan is more than ready to dish back every insult the wizard serves and then some, perpetuating this idea that wizards and sorcerers are like oil and water? And thus, the back-and-forth bickerfest that is Renan's relationship with a wizard was born. In designing the wizard, I knew from the outset I wanted him to be an older man and that he would have a scholarly design. I know, old man, scholar, wizard, real original. But I wanted him to be old and wise to contrast Renan's young but gifted. I also envisioned him as likely to be an instructor or even headmaster at some prestigious academy for wizards, so the scholarly look just came with the package. Is it original? Nah. Can you take one look at this guy and know his deal? Yeah, I think so. And considering he'll never be more than one of several minor, semi-recurring characters in the series, sometimes leaning on tropes to quickly sell a side character's personality and background can be the best option. We don't need to spend time learning about him. We get what his deal is from the first moment we see him. The fun comes when he and Renan get to verbally duke it out every time they're in a room together. Of course, I still wanted to add some amount of intrigue to his character design. After all, if he's representative of many of the types of wizards out in the world, his design could carry over to other wizards. That's where sketch number 2 comes in. Forgive all the wonkiness in these sketchbook photos. Taking pictures of a sketchbook is hard, and my physical drawings tend to be small and rough. I'll be honest, I barely looked at my initial sketch before doing this one, but that can actually be a good trick for character designs. Test yourself and see what elements of your initial sketch stood out enough that you remembered to add them into the next one. Like the hat. I knew I wanted a rounded, scholarly cap. I took inspiration from the scholar caps in Elden Ring for the design. I liked the shape, and I liked it being rounded as opposed to the hard edges other scholar caps tend to go for. I also remembered the high, ruffled collar and the mustache. Totally forgot I gave him a beard in my initial sketch, but once he was clean-shaven minus the mustache, I honestly couldn't see going back. His eyes were cartoony in the first sketch since he was having a comedic moment with Renan, so this is the first time I actually drew his eyes, which I would describe as generic old eyes. I also gave him triangular eyebrows instead of the bushy ones from the first sketch, which I think I like a little more. Finally, I had the Itha pendant make a reappearance on a chain or cord. I knew even as I drew it that this is more of a placeholder. I'd really like to design a pendant that's unique to his status as either a high-level wizard or an instructor at the Wizard Academy. The rest I started designing based on some reference photos I found online, mixed with my own ideas of what I thought a wizard of his standing would dress like. All I knew going into my first few sketches was that I wanted a layered robe look, a pretty standard scholar-wizard design choice. And then something fun about the designing process happened. On a whim to add more visual intrigue, I drew a beaded pendulum hanging from his waist. This was purely for design at first, but then as I sat and thought about it, it quickly occurred to me that this was a tool. Wizards in this world cast spells by drawing glyphs. A glyph is a combination of runes assembled within a containing circle. By holding the rope of the pendulum at a specific bead, wizards can swing the pendulum in a circle that would then trace the outer edge of their glyph to the size they want. Aha! Design and utility. I like it. It's staying. After finishing this second sketch, I was honestly sort of unenthused by his design. I started feeling more and more like I didn't want him to be just a generic-looking old man, especially as I continued to write and started learning more about his personality beyond argues with Brendan constantly. The more he started to feel like a person, the more I wanted to make his character design more unique to him. I moved away from my sketchbook and over to my drawing tablet, where I now had the tools to focus on tightening my character design without having to squint past all my figure sketching underneath my drawings. Between the second sketch and this version, a lot carried over. I'm certainly not done with this design by a long shot, but I'm honing in on it. I added some larger sideburns to the side of his face to do something a little different, as well as showing he has hair at the back of his head. I've sketched a few hatless ideas where we discover he's basically bald up top, so the extra long sideburns are how he gives the illusion that he's got more hair under the cap. He's a little self-conscious about it. I also replaced the ruffled collar with a button-up and tie underneath, because he was feeling a little too fantasy, and I felt giving him a more ordinary shirt underneath grounds him back in the style of the rest of the world. Like I said, he's definitely still a work in progress. I'm not in love with the sash belt, and I know what I was going for with the robe under his jacket, but it doesn't quite sell the shapes I had in my head. I think after a few more rounds, I'll be happy with him. The wizard isn't the only new character I designed this week. Anyone who read the original TCOM knows that on top of being a sorcerer, Renan also enjoys alchemy. He must know other alchemists, right? Right. Enter the alchemist character. We meet him at the same time that we meet the wizard. I'll be honest, I had even less to go off of when designing the alchemist other than two things. He's nice, and he's got a pretty face. Oh, yeah, and of course he's an alchemist, which led me to, honestly, a design I had no love for. You can tell I gave up halfway through as my sketching became less and less refined. This showed me two things. One, that I needed to think harder about what an alchemist in this world would wear, and two, that drawing pretty but still masculine but still has a kind face is difficult. His first face is pretty, but he looks kinda arrogant about it. I didn't want arrogant, I wanted soft boy. The major point had to be his eyes. He needs pretty eyes, but they can't be sexy anime man pretty because those tend to skew more arrogant. But I didn't want to throw distinctly feminine eyes on him either. Here's a few sketches as I tried to figure out where the line is. You can see how the eye shape really affects the read on his personality. I wasn't happy with these either. Something just wasn't clicking. I decided to put my problems with his character design on the back burner while I worked on who he is. It's a lot easier to design a character when you know at least a handful of things about them. And nice, pretty, and good at alchemy was clearly not enough. In my initial draft of the chapter he appears in, he acts as the peacemaker between Renan and the wizards bickering, and he enjoys talking with Renan about alchemy. He struck me as the kind of guy who never has anything bad to say about anyone. He's just a nice guy whom Renan respects for his skills as an alchemist. But just a nice guy does not a character make. At least, not one that you can latch onto. And I had to admit there was a pre-existing character who I was struggling not to make him too much like. Bernard, the head gardener and resident plant enthusiast. But I couldn't deny that the two had a lot in common, and the alchemist gave me the same vibes as Bernard. With a little help from my friends who listen to me when I'm having artist problems, it became obvious what needed to be done. Make them related. Now all those little design quirks in my head that made him look too much like Bernard were justified. They're brothers. A gardener and an alchemist. They made sense, and it added a possible explanation for how Renan and the alchemist met. This can't be all to his background, though. I felt like he needed more. He's a nice, attractive man. Women probably flock to him. What does he do about it? I can't imagine him being a player type who flirts with girls and bounces between women. It didn't feel right to his character. What if he's already married? Happily so. He even has kids. He's not just Bernard's brother and an alchemist, he's a husband and a father. But he's still pretty. He and his wife know that. I haven't designed her, mostly because I'm not sure she'll ever make a proper appearance, but I imagine her as an I must protect this cinnamon roll with my life type of person. You'll get that sense based on the way he talks about her. What if when he's first introduced, he's wearing a mask? One he wears when he leaves the house so that women don't swoon over him or follow him around. His wife doesn't like women ogling her man, and fending off women at the front door sets a bad example for the kids. He takes it off once he's safely inside the nursery and we see his pretty face for the first time. That could be a fun idea. He's an alchemist. What if the mask was dual purpose? It hides his features, yes, but just like the wizard's pendulum, it should have meaning. What if it's a gas mask? But I don't just want him to be wearing a generic gas mask. It should have meaning, a design that speaks to who he is and what he cares about. He has young children and a brother who loves plants. What if there is some kind of flower motif to the mask, like the respirators being flowers? That sounds neat. What if the mask itself had an insect-like look? Bugs, flowers, it works together. I felt like I had a much better understanding of who he is now, but the eye thing was still a problem. So I turned to the internet for pretty anime men references and sketched something I was content with. Then I got to the mask design, which, just look at how many sketches I have. Turns out fitting flower and bug motifs onto a mask with limited space is pretty hard. I'm still wrestling in my head with whether I want the mask to be unsettling with cute elements or just cool looking. I still haven't settled on a design that makes me happy, but I did feel happier about the alchemist design. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized I again needed to pull back on his outfit. I was trying too hard again to be fantasy when the setting for the world is a little more grounded than that. That brought me over to my tablet for his tightened up character design. I was feeling better about it, but I still felt like there was more tweaking to do, just like with the wizard. I sat on my thoughts for a while, then after a little more thinking and looking at reference photos, I took another stab at him. And this felt pretty good. It occurred to me that if he's really intending to hide himself when he's out and about, a full cloak made more sense than the poncho thing I was drawing him in. I changed his hair texture to something more like Bernard's, and seeing them side by side, they totally read as brothers now. He's getting pretty cute. I might almost be done with his design. And there you have it, my character design process. Or at least the way it worked this time. There really isn't any consistency to how I tackle character designing. Seeing the alchemist next to the wizard, I definitely think I have more work to do with the wizard before he really fits with the world. I'm excited to see how they'll look once I've finalized their design and picked out some colors. But for now, it's time to tackle my last requirement for the week, painting. Thank goodness for the internet. For all its brain rot and toxic pools, sometimes you find people who are out there just trying to pass on good information. Which is exactly what I needed this week as I tried to figure out what I was doing wrong with my painting techniques. Of course, the professional painters of the internet still make it look so easy it makes me want to weep, but I decided on a game plan as I watched people make beautiful things happen with varying brushes. I'm going to hone in on the brushes I saw recommended and give each one its own week for focus. In challenging myself to work primarily with one brush type, I hope to level up my skills with said brushes. I'm starting big this week with the classic flat brush. Its job is simple: coverage. I already had familiarity with this brush. I do, in fact, use it whenever I'm setting down my first paint layer. But I wanted to see just how much I can accomplish with only flat brushes. Something blocky was the obvious choice since the brushes are, well, flat and blocky. So I went with a city skyline. The more time I spent with the brushes, the more I saw ways to get thin lines when I needed them. But for the most part, I relied on using the width of the brushes to apply as much paint as possible in one go. It's still not that clean, my edges are still wibbly wobbly, and what started as my attempt to do a kind of washy gradient at the bottom failed miserably and ended up here. Then I think I sort of figured out what I was going for while adding some details to the sky. Maybe I'll do this exercise in 2-week batches. This week I fumbled around in the dark until I started getting the hang of things, so maybe if I try this again next week with the same brushes, I'll get better results. But hey, it's progress. My control is definitely improving, so I'll call it a win for the week. And that's all for this week, gang. Thanks for listening.